I'm Gwen Preston of Resource Maven. We're here at the Metals Investor Forum in Vancouver in September, and I'm joined by Dawson Brisco of Morien Resources.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. Morien is a dividend-paying company, so that I start with that because it's unique amongst a lot of the amongst the junior resource sector.
I think we're the only dividend-paying company here
At this event, yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah.
And you can pay dividends because you own two royalties,
Right.
one of which is currently which is already churning out a fair bit of money.
Yep.
And that's on the Donkin coal mine in Nova Scotia. So we could talk about the details of Morien, but there's not that much to talk about because Morien's a very straightforward company that
Pretty simple.
collects checks,
Yep.
royalty checks,
Cash flow positive for the first time this quarter.
right,
Yeah.
and then hands the money out to shareholders,
Yeah.
basically,
Right.
while also looking for other opportunities. But
Yeah, that's right.
pretty much.
Yeah.
So instead, let's talk about coal.
Okay.
Not something that a lot of the viewers are probably super in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you give us, right now, coal prices are doing really well.
Coal prices are at a 6-year high, although if you listen to the rhetoric out there, you'd probably think the market was rather bleak.
Right.
But the reality is thermal coal is at a 6-year high. Thermal coal going into Europe right now is at $100 USD per ton. Metallurgical coal is pretty close to its 6-year high, not that far off and probably on its way to a 6-year high.
And so what's been propelling that?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, some of the short-term explanations are that natural gas market's tightening, so that creates a higher nat gas price, which creates more thermal coal demand.
Yeah.
You got a increasing oil price, which has the same impact. More recently, we saw Belgium's nuclear reactors go offline.
Right.
I mean, over the long term, which is what I find more fascinating, is that the reality is that you've got a really strong global market for thermal coal. You had 70 gigawatts of new power plant capacity come online last year alone.
Okay.
And to put that in perspective, that's about half the capacity of the entire European Union. And right now there's about 200.
And that's what's new online.
And that's what's new. And currently I think there's 220 gigawatts under construction.
Right.
Most of that's in Asia, but
Right.
yeah.
So this concept that we have in North America, where coal is dead, or
Right.
I mean, it changed a bit with Trump, but still, there's a bit of an assumption that coal is a passé thing.
Right.
It's just not borne out.
It's not the case, and the reality is metallurgical coal will always be in demand as long as we need bridges and buildings, and there's even 100 tons of met coal needed for your average wind turbine. So met coal will always be there. Thermal coal still accounts for about 40% of global electricity demand, so
Right.
it'll always be there
It'll
as well.
always
And China's still a major factor in that category. There's about 970 gigawatts of power plant capacity in China right now, and people talk about China's consumption going down, but really it's just a curve that's going from this to this.
Right. It's easing a little bit.
Right, and most of those power plants came online in 2001 to 2016, and those are 60-year power plants, so they're only 11 or 12 years into their life.
Right.
So if they do wean themselves off coal, it won't be quick or dramatic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Donkin has many decades of mine life, but these plants are going to need
Yeah,
coal for beyond
Donkin's
that.
got 25 plus years of mine life ahead of it, and
Right.
all the coal's selling really well. The coal quality is coming out perfect as far as they're concerned. The sulfur is down. It's a 14,000 BTU product, so it's marketing really well.
So let's talk a little bit about Donkin, since we've sort of naturally transitioned over there. Donkin is started operations not quite a year ago,
Yep.
and is ramping up, being operated by another company, right?
Right.
Let's not pretend
Right.
Morien is not building a mine.
Yep.
So Cameron
Nothing to do with
built and runs this mine.
Right.
So just talk about where it's at now and where you think it's going.
So Chris Klein is the operator. He's a 4th generation coal miner. He runs the Klein Group. He's done this a dozen times before in the United States.
Yeah.
He's self-funding the operation himself. They've spent about $200 million on it already. It went into production in February of 2017, where we received our first royalty check of $4,000. Now it's about $260,000, and we think at some point it'll be close to $2 million a quarter.
That's right. So $2 million a quarter
Yeah.
for doing nothing. And I
For
mean,
doing
that
nothing.
sounds like I'm being
Right.
facetious about it, but that's what royalties are. You did the legwork
Yep.
early on, you identified the asset,
Yep.
you parlayed that into a royalty, and
Yep.
now you sit back and collect the checks.
That's right, and the timeline to get to that $10 million number might be 3 or 4 years. But
Right.
they're on their way.
Yeah.
I think we're cash flow positive, as I said earlier, and we think that by the end of the year, they'll be at a run rate of over 1 million tons. and hitting probably peak production in 2 or 3 years' time.
Right, absolutely.
And our plan, as you know, is to dividend the majority of that cash flow back to shareholders.
Right, and that deserves a little bit of focus here before we wrap up. So again, viewers here, people at the conference, oddly for investors not super familiar with dividends, because that's not the game we generally play, but I mean, that's the plan here is sort of 80% of the money that you're bringing in. That's a ballpark number. Yeah. You're literally planning on giving back to shareholders.
Yeah, it's a dividend story. It always will be. That's how we've pitched it. We're not going to change that model. We'd like to grow the asset base if we can, if we can find something that's accretive. We're not going to overpay for anything, and we're not going to grow for the sake of growing. But we will add to the asset base if we find something that makes sense. If not, we will just stick with Donkin and issue dividends at a pretty juggernaut pace. But 80% of free cash flow would translate to something in the range of, we think, an 8 to 10 cent dividend.
And this is for a stock currently trading at
55 cents. So a 10 cent dividend on a 30 million market cap company.
Right.
Right.
And just and you say that as though just sitting there issuing juggernaut dividends would be the only thing that could happen, but I don't see that as the only thing that could happen. There's two other possibilities, which is that another royalty company would look at your cash flow and say, well, that's pretty interesting and want to buy you, or the operator of the mine themselves would decide that they don't want to keep paying you the royalty and would want to acquire you.
That's right. A $10 million royalty doesn't hang around that long in a 30 million market cap company, so the likelihood that it would be acquired by another royalty company is very real. And Chris Klein may beat them to that. He owns 11% of the company, and there is a likelihood that at some point, before he really scales it up, he would have a run at Morien.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's this lovely, steady dividend rationale, and then there's this potential for a deal that could come at any time.
Right. So our job is very simple: just try to add as much value as we can before we become a real takeover target.
Absolutely.
And that timeline might be 18 to 24 months.
Right. And doing so in a coal market that is long and strong.
Yeah, 6 years. It's been 6 years, and it's been a steady incline, but now we're at a 6-year high. Metallurgical coal is right behind, and we feel really confident about the long-term fundamentals staying there.
Well, congrats. It's been a long grind, but you're in a very good position right now. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.